Jaden Daniels out. Tucker Kraft hurt yesterday. Christian Kirk in. These are just a couple of examples of why I wait until Saturday to go through every single matchup to identify the must-start and sit wide receivers for any week in fantasy football. So we're doing that for week 3, and I'm one of the only fantasy YouTubers working on a Saturday. So please go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, get into our first matchup. It's the duel of the backup quarterbacks. Cincinnati Bengals at the Minnesota Vikings. Jake Browning versus Carson Wentz. Now, I still believe that both of our superstar wide receivers are must-start players. Jamar Chase, for the obvious reason, the guy actually has historically done pretty well with Jake Browning. Jake Browning is a legitimate backup quarterback who has come in an extended time and relieved Joe Burrow beforehand. So I do think that he'll be good enough to supply Jamar Chase for another 100-yard game if the matchup allows it. Now, Justin Jefferson, I actually think, is going to be better off this week. That's a low-key feeling of mine, is he'll be better off with Carson Wentz, because how can it be worse? I have been mocked and ridiculed for months now, saying I don't think J.J. McCarthy's that good. Well, those have definitely quieted down because he sucks. Like, it is just abysmal to watch this guy play football. So I just don't see a world where Justin Jefferson is not better off with Carson Wentz this week. So I do think that he's on the border and on the fringe of must start because of the, fantasy production so far this year. But I do think he's getting a break here by getting Carson Wentz. But I will say this, with T. Higgins, he's a high-end middle-tier flex option for me. Because listen, Jake Browning is good. I don't think he's good enough to supply 2 wide receivers like Joe Burrow is, for example, right? I mean, just look at T. Higgins last week. Yes, he got a lot of targets, but it wasn't really coming through, and it wasn't, sustainable for the amount of targets that he got last week. Minnesota's a tougher test this week for the Cincinnati Bengals than they were tested last week with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think it's a really tougher test, but you can't play any other receiver in this matchup that is not one of the top 2 guys for the Bengals or Justin Jefferson for the Minnesota Vikings. The Houston Texans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. We got 2 starting quarterbacks in this one, and I still consider Nico a must start. Listen, Nico's involvement is like dominant wide receiver 1 numbers right there. You cannot ignore the amount of work that he's getting. And yes, there's drives where he's not as important, but there's drives where they hyper-target him. You saw that on Monday night last week against the Bucs. They hyper-target this guy on certain drives, and then they'll go a couple drives with not targeting him. Either way, bottom line is this: Nico Collins is an elite player in fantasy football, and this is a great matchup for Nico Collins. And I would say that Brian Thomas Jr. is no longer a must-start right now. Listen, Brian Thomas Jr., I called him a buy low this week, and I do believe that still. But it doesn't mean you have to put him right in your lineup right away. He's a high-end flex option for sure. But must start, he's not producing like that. Like, this guy has been a massive disappointment on tons of work this year. He looks weak. Like, honestly, it looks like the injury may be more affecting him than they're leading on. But he's going to play in this game, so it must not be affecting him that bad. So I do think Brian Thomas Jr. high-end play. But I will say this: Derek Stingley, that matchup, it doesn't make it any better for me personally. And then I would also add that Travis Hunter is a higher-end flex too. Because listen, Travis Hunter last week played more defense for sure. But I will say that I think in any given week, Travis Hunter still can go off. Now, we haven't seen that yet from Travis Hunter. I believe that we will see it at some point, though. Because Travis Hunter, again, make no mistake, and always remember this, he was drafted to be a wide receiver first. Don't ever forget that. So I think Travis Hunter is still a solid play against the Houston Texans, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. is going to see Derek Stingley the most of the day. And then Christian Kirk makes his return. I believe that he is a playable guy. Now, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say, yes, you must play him above Travis Hunter, above Brian Thomas Jr. He's a lower-end flex option. If you're in deeper leagues and you're struggling right now, I think Christian Kirk can be played because Houston is desperately trying to find another wide receiver option outside of Nico Collins. That's been their problem so far. And I will say this: Jaden Higgins isn't going in my lineup. I'd actually play Diami Brown before I played him. I think Diami Brown is actually a decent flex for someone who's in a really deep league or really struggling with injuries, but just because of the fact that I don't think it's as sustainable, and I do think Travis Hunter will see more involvement, I'm not going to have him as a flexible option this week. The Indianapolis Colts at the Tennessee Titans is our next matchup, and I like Calvin Ridley a lot better this week than I have for the entirety of the season so far. He had 2 brutal matchups to start the year. Pat Surtain in Denver, and then he had the Los Angeles Rams, who are also a very good defense last week. He hasn't done anything in fantasy yet. I think this week is the first real break in schedule for Calvin Ridley, and I do think that he actually does well this week. Would I say he's a must start? No, because I think Elic Ayamaner will get work in this matchup as well. He's been getting targeted too, so it's not like Calvin Ridley is fielding 10 plus targets on a gamely basis. He's not. He's got Elic Ayamaner right there as well. While I do think Calvin's the better option, I do think Elic Ayamaner is playable, but I wouldn't play him above Michael Pittman or Josh Downs. I think Michael Pittman this week, the matchup versus L'Jarius Sneed potentially could be a little bit dangerous for him, but that's why I think Josh Downs is also flexible as well. Josh Downs last week got the amount of targets that I always thought would be there, and I do think could continue to move forward that way. But either way, guys, I've said this one all week. I think this is a lower scoring matchup, so I don't think any of them are super high-end options outside of Calvin Ridley probably. And I'm not going to play Alec Pierce, and you definitely, at this point, if you're hosting Tyler Lockett on your roster, he needs to get kicked out of the house at this point. Las Vegas Raiders at the Washington Commanders is our next matchup. And obviously, if you haven't seen the news, Jaden Daniels is out. O-U-T out. Now, I have been asked a lot, where does that leave Deebo Samuel in particular? I will tell you this. I still think Deebo Samuel is a must start. And I'll tell you the reason why is because in Cliff Kingsbury's offense, Cliff Kingsbury is known for using wide receiver screens into oblivion. That's what Deebo Samuel does really well. He's great in short yardage situations, and he's great in space. They will use him like that with whatever quarterback, and especially a backup, because he's not going to be expected to push the ball down the field as much as Jaden Daniels would be. So I think that Deebo's way more playable this week, for example, than Terry McLaurin. I think Terry McLaurin is a mid-tier flex play this week. I just don't think that his playing style matches up with a backup quarterback who won't be asked to throw the ball that much down the field. I think Terry, if you're desperate, is a decent flex play in the middle tier, but I don't think that he should be played above Jacoby Myers this week. Jacoby Myers, guys, is a legitimate wide receiver 1 in the NFL. His target share speaks for itself. This guy is basically getting 10 targets per game. He should absolutely go in a lot of lineups this week. I would play him over Calvin Ridley, to be honest with you. I do think I would. They're very close, but that's a good start-sit question to post on FS Roundup right there. This is completely free. You can sign up for a free account and start posting start-sit polls, and then you can also contribute to other people's start-sit polls to be helpful for them and get a majority rule live updated on what is the best move for your team. And if you want to take it a step further with me, you can actually get a full team breakdown from me when you sign up for the premium subscription, and I will break down your entire team, including trade ideas and waiver wire moves, everything that helps your team get better after your 12-day free trial ends and you are officially a customer at FS Roundup. So go check out FS Roundup today, post a poll, and sign up for a premium subscription to get a full team breakdown from me. Now, getting into our next matchup, it's the Los Angeles Rams at the Philadelphia Eagles, and Puka is obviously a must-start. I've been telling people all week, I think that he has the look of a league-winning player this year. This guy is a pure wide receiver 1, end of story, and he's getting used in a lot of different ways. They're running the ball with him the first 2 games. It's actually really interesting to see what they're using him like. So Puka Nacua goes nowhere near your bench, and I think people understand that, so we'll move on. Devontae Adams, high-end flex option right here. I think this matchup, they will throw the ball a ton because they're not going to be able to run as effectively this week on the Eagles front 7. I think this matchup definitely warrants 2 wide receivers in Los Angeles on 99% of people's starting lineups. I would play Devontae Adams over Calvin Ridley. I'd play Devontae Adams over Jacoby Myers, who I like a lot. I think Devontae Adams is a great play this week, and one I would play over A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown at this point, guys, it's hard. Like, I don't think he's a must-sit, and same thing with Devonta Smith, because at some point, Jalen has to throw a passing touchdown. It will happen at some point. But I don't know who it's going to be to, and I can tell you this. A.J. Brown, while yes, he did get 8 targets last week, a lot of them were basically just like 5 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. It's just not adding up to good fantasy production, and I don't know when that changes. So in a lot of situations, I will be trying to find other options than A.J. Brown for anybody who asks me. Same thing with Devonta Smith. He's even worse off than A.J. Brown because he's not getting the amount of targets as A.J. Brown is. So I think that they're both mid-tier flex options for me, honestly, until I see something different. The Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers is our next matchup. And Drake London, I still do think is a must start. Like, I do really consider him to be a really good play this week because of the fact that Carolina's defense is atrocious. And I think that there's a chance that his injury last week affected him to the point where he wasn't as involved in the game plan. I think this week he has a big week against the Carolina Panthers. That's one of my takes for the week, I guess you could say. And then I think Ted McMillan is also right on that edge of must start because of the fact this guy is a pure wide receiver one. Carolina has no other option. They can't throw to anybody else. Xavier Legette, if you have him on your roster, it's time to cut bait. This guy can't play. And I think that when you look at the work that Ted McMillan's getting on fsroundup.com, you'll understand why this guy needs to be in your lineup 99% of the time. He's seeing everything. And I get it. Atlanta's not, in theory, the best matchup because their defense is playing better. But A.J. Terrell being injured for this game is an opportunity for Ted. I'll play Ted most of the time this week. Darnell Mooney this week, I think, is flexible. I think we'll see him get continuously involved as well. And I think they're just going to pass the ball more effectively this week than they did last week versus the Minnesota Vikings, a much tougher defense. While I wouldn't say Darnell Mooney is flexible over Calvin Ridley or A.J. Brown, I do think he's a mid to lower tier flex option that I would play over somebody like a Stephon Diggs, for example. And speaking of Stephon Diggs, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the New England Patriots is our next matchup. And there's not a single must-start wide receiver in this category. I mean, I think DK Metcalf is a higher-end flex option that I would play over A.J. Brown. I would probably play him over somebody like Devonta Smith as well, but I would not play him over Calvin Ridley. Listen, DK Metcalf has dropped a lot of passes this year. I don't know if people realize that. He's dropped a lot of passes. This guy has not looked that great. He looks good with the ball in his hands, but sometimes he doesn't have the ball in his hands because it goes through them. I mean, it's actually kind of embarrassing that they gave this guy $130 million and he's not even really catching the ball nearly as consistently as George Pickens is. So I think DK Metcalf, just based on the fact that he's not always catching these passes, is not a must start. And Pittsburgh's offense in general just isn't that good yet. So I don't think that New England is that big of a matchup difference to where I think that DK has a really good day. Kayshon Boutte is the better option between Stephon Diggs and him. It's just a fact. Like at this point, Kayshon Boutte, yes, he only got one catch last week, but it was in the end zone and he still looks the best. Stephon Diggs in a full PPR format is fine. But if you're playing half PPR, it's not even a question. Stephon Diggs should not be in your lineup over guys like Darnell Mooney. He really should not be. Like, this guy is not getting anything down the field, and all he's getting is a lot of, like, short yardage types of throws. I think Kayshon Boutte is easily the best option in New England at this point, and you can't play anybody else in this matchup. Keep an eye on Calvin Austin because he is involved on a weekly basis, but this guy shouldn't really go in your lineup at this point. Now, the next matchup is the Green Bay Packers at the Cleveland Browns this week, and listen, this matchup offers a lot of potential, but I don't think a must start in here. Green Bay, obviously, if you haven't heard the news, is dealing with yet another injury on top of Jaden Reed. Tucker Kraft injured his knee at practice late in the week, and he probably is not going to play. As of the time of this filming, he's still deemed questionable, but I will say this, it does not look like he's going to play because what they said essentially was that it's not a season-ending injury. If you have to go that far, I have to assume that you're not going to play the next game. So I think for that reason, like Romeo Doubs is the best flex option in this matchup. They're going to have to use somebody, and I think Romeo Doubs, if you just look at the usage on FS Roundup, he's always in on the most amount of snaps. He's always in on the most amount of routes run. This guy is used as kind of a wide receiver one in this offense. He just doesn't always get targeted like it. This week, I kind of think they're left without a choice. So I think Romeo Doubs is a solid flex play in the same tier as Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman, who are basically back-to-back in my rankings because their work has been basically identical through the first 2 weeks. I mean, they basically have handled the same amount of targets. Jerry Jeudy has one more target than Cedric Tillman does, but Cedric Tillman has been more effective and he's gotten in the end zone. So I think that these guys are both playable, and they're both relatively high-end flex options because the Browns are going to be in a position to where they're going to throw a ton because they're going to be trailing very, very quickly in this matchup. And then I would also say that Matthew Golden can be bumped up a little bit. I'm not saying that he's a must-start by any stretch of the imagination, and I wouldn't even say he's a high-end flex. But I would say he's a mid-tier flex, and one I would still play over Dontavian Wicks, because Dontavian Wicks has been nothing but inconsistent throughout the entirety of his career. But that being said, we've got 5 playable options in this matchup right here, and I will say this. Keep an eye on Savion Williams this week of the Green Bay Packers. This guy is, I think, their Christian Watson replacement. I think that he was brought in to do that, and I'm very interested to see what his workload is like now that they're down 2 weapons. Do not play him, do not roster him, but keep an eye on what his usage is this week. The New York Jets at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is our next matchup. And listen, Mike Evans is still a must-start to me, especially now that we have the news that Emeka Egbuka is a true questionable tag. Emeka Egbuka did not practice Wednesday and Thursday. He returned to a limited on Friday, which indicates to me he probably is going to play. But I will say Mike Evans becomes that much more important if Emeka Egbuka is even slowed in this game. I think if he doesn't play, Mike, there's just no way you could convince me to put Mike on the bench. And I think Emeka Egbuka, if he plays, he's still a must-start guy. He drops a little bit just because if he's injured and he's hampered a little bit, you have to drop him. But I still do think he's just been too good to put on the bench so far. And this defense doesn't scare me. But Garrett Wilson is a high-end flex as well, just because of the target share. Now, this guy has Tyrod Taylor this week. I don't think that he's going to be great. And I think that Tampa's defense will get after Tyrod Taylor this week. But I will say Garrett Wilson is the only guy in that Jets offense that's worth targeting. So yes, he has to be, just because of target share, at the top of flex consideration basically every single week. The Denver Broncos at the Los Angeles Chargers is our next matchup. And I do consider Courtland Sutton a must start for many different reasons. Number one, I think that this matchup, Denver will be able to put up a fight. I don't know if they're going to be super high scoring, but I will say this. Courtland Sutton has a weird, sneaky history of good play against the Los Angeles Chargers. I like history. I like to take that into account when I discuss matchups. Courtland Sutton has had a sneaky good history against the Chargers. So I am going to be putting Sutton in my lineups everywhere I've got him. That's just a spoiler alert. So I think, yes, he is a must-start guy, and Ladd McConkey no longer is. I mean, really at this point, guys, Ladd McConkey, I've been discussing for weeks now, is being taken away so many opportunities that he would unquestionably get last year. Deep targets that used to be his, that's Quentin Johnston now. A lot of these 3rd down, 4th down clutch throws where he just needs to get open, that's Keenan Allen now. So I think this week in particular, Keenan Allen is the most unlikely guy to be shadowed by Pat Surtain this week. I think it's either Quentin Johnston or Ladd McConkey or a mix of both. For that reason, I would say Keenan is basically right there with Ladd McConkey as far as playable options. And Quentin Johnston's the one I least want out of this matchup right here. Because again, I think that he has a legitimate threat of being shadowed by Pat Surtain for a lot of this game because he will be their true outside wide receiver. Troy Franklin, I think, is flexible. I do think you could play him in a pinch. He's not as nearly high-end as these other Chargers wide receiver options, but I will say that he's a solid flex. And then Marvin Mims Jr., if you're looking for a big play, I think he can give it to you, but definitely Troy Franklin is the guy that you would want in Denver between those two guys. The New Orleans Saints at the Seattle Seahawks this week, and Jackson Smith-Njigba remains a must-start. The guy's target share is through the roof. He's getting 100-yard-plus games in both weeks. This guy always needs to be in your lineup. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. I think Chris Olave is definitely the better play than Rashid Shaheed, but I do think Rashid Shaheed still has been involved enough for me to consider him consistently a relatively decent flex option towards the middle. I would play him over Darnell Mooney personally. I really do think that Rashid Shaheed at some point will pop off for one of these games that we know him to be, which is like he gets 4 catches for 120 yards. I think that's very possible. And I'd play him over Cooper Kupp for that very reason. Listen, Cooper Kupp came back and did well last week, but I've said this all week. I think that there's a good chance that we're going to look back and say the Seahawks are just like the Jets. Not as far as offensive talent and offensive ability to push the ball down the field, but as far as playing the Steelers, when you're coming off a game versus them, you're going to look better than you actually are. And I think the Seahawks are going to see that this week, particularly with Cooper Kupp. So if your heart so desires, I think that maybe he gets like 5 targets in this game and he comes down with a catch or 2, but I'm not playing Cooper Kupp in any of my matchups. He's a relatively lower tier flex option. Torrey Horton, keep an eye on him. Keep an eye on him. He did get in the end zone last week. Not involved in it yet, but keep an eye on this guy. The Dallas Cowboys at the Chicago Bears is our next matchup. And obviously, CeeDee Lamb is must start. He hasn't hit the big one yet, but he will. It's coming. The usage is there. Rome Odunze is now a must-start. I was saying for weeks leading into the season, and now it's confirmed. Rome Odunze is the number one wide receiver in this offense. Whenever there's downfield opportunities, it's Rome Odunze. You see him always in range of where Caleb Williams is trying to throw to. So I think that Rome Odunze is absolutely, at this point, a must-start on your roster. George Pickens is a high-end flex. I think this could be very similar to last week where they repeat. I think they could put up as many points or get close to it versus the Bears defense, because the Bears defense in the secondary particularly is getting shredded right now with injuries. George Pickens has another great opportunity in this game. High-end flex I would play above A.J. Brown, and a guy I would also play above Garrett Wilson as well. DJ Moore I think is a decent flex option, but this guy is clearly the wide receiver 2. Like, he's not necessarily getting wide receiver 2 numbers all the time, but I will say this, like, everything that is like he gets targeted for is always short distance. DJ Moore just doesn't have the upside that Rome Odunze has, and it's not really questionable. Kevontae Turpin, if you wanted to play another Dallas player, that's the guy you would want to play out of this wide receiver group. He gets targets and he gets runs out of the backfield as well. Arizona Cardinals at the San Francisco 49ers. No must starts in this one. Backup quarterback play, in all likelihood, in my opinion, is what's going to happen again in San Francisco. And Mac Jones can throw it. Like, I've been proven wrong way too many times to keep doubting this guy, but there is a chance that Brock Purdy goes. So keep an eye on this one. As of the time of this filming, he's a true questionable with a chance to go. Juwan Jennings is also in this position where we don't know if he's playing either. Now, from what I've seen, he didn't get seen at practice all week. So, in theory, it would be weird if he played. But I will say, if he does play, Mac Jones definitely wanted to use him a bunch. So he definitely should be out there and in consideration to be in your lineup. And if not him, Ricky Pearsall, I think, becomes a must start. I think Ricky Pearsall, if Juwan Jennings isn't a go, he must be in your lineup. So again, that's one to keep an eye on here, and it's an unfortunate situation because it's one of the later games, but I will say this, if you have the option between Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Worthy, for example, I do think that Ricky Pearsall, if he is the lone guy, should be in your lineup above Xavier Worthy. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. is a higher-end flex option, but just not above these San Francisco guys, because I just can't rely on Kyler Murray very consistently to get him the ball. I just don't trust Marvin right now, and it's sad because I did think we were starting to grow a little bit. The Sunday night game, the Kansas City Chiefs at the New York Giants, and Malik Nabers is clearly must start. Xavier Worthy may play in this game. Now, it's tough because it's a Sunday night matchup, and we don't know the results of what this injury is going to do to him. I will say this, if Xavier Worthy does play and you have the option to put him in, I would probably do it. I think that he will be involved in this offense because they have no choice. Flat out no choice. Hollywood Brown is not good enough. And yes, he's a flexible player even if Worthy goes. But if Worthy doesn't go, Hollywood Brown is probably someone that I don't consider to be a higher end flex option. It's someone that I would play over Marvin Harrison Jr., for example. But Wan'Dale Robinson, if Xavier Worthy plays, I'd play him over Hollywood Brown. Wan'Dale Robinson, the sneaky thing about him is that he's always been involved and is a decent PPR flex option. I don't think we'll ever see that upside from him again. I think it's very rare that we will see that. But I will say Wan'Dale Robinson definitely is a flexible guy every week in a full PPR format. And then Tyquan Thornton. Keep an eye on him. He's definitely a deep threat, and we'll see if that role evolves a little bit. Now, our Monday night game, the last game of the week, it's a high flyer, Detroit at Baltimore. You want options in this matchup. And I have said multiple times this week, I think the Ravens will end up beating them pretty decisively, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be a good fantasy game. I believe it will be. You play him on Ross St. Brown, and you play Zay Flowers easily. Zay Flowers is being used as a true number one in fantasy football. And I'm waiting for my apology from a lot of yahoos this offseason that said, how could you have him ranked over Tyreek Hill? Yeah, it looks like it's working so far. So I'm waiting for my apology on Zay Flowers right now. I'll tell you that much. Jamison Williams is a high-end flex option, I think. DeAndre Hopkins is a mid-tier. And same with Rashad Bateman. I think it's a low tier. But in this matchup, again, I think it's good to have an option. So let me know what your wide receiver room looks like for week 3. And if you want to see the full top 30 wide receiver rankings this week, click on this video right here.